please join me in welcoming Kirke and Cory to the stage.
Well, thanks for joining us today, Cory. Really appreciate you giving a perspective on emerging technology in government. And I think what's going to be really interesting this morning, I guess this afternoon, will be an actual use case that's making a difference for the citizen and for government. So for those in the audience that aren't from the state of Texas, maybe you can give a perspective on what's the mission of GLO, and then maybe specifically about what your office does.
Absolutely. The General Land Office is a pretty unique agency in that we're older than the state of Texas. Many of you may not know the history of Texas. We were a nation before we were a state, and we won our independence from Mexico in 1836. We were a very poor nation, had no money, but we had a ton of land. And so one of the first things that they did was to create the General Land Office, and we used that land as currency, basically, to build an army, to get people to come and settle here. Flash forward to 1876, and they stopped giving away the land and decided to set aside the rest of the land for basically to help fund public schools. They created what's called the Texas Permanent School Fund, and the General Land Office manages that today. We literally do anything we can with the land, from oil and gas development, solar power, wind power, commercial leasing, even water rights now. And so we generate about $1 billion a year that gets put into trust and helps fund public schools here in Texas. Over the years, we've been given a number of other missions as well. We respond to oil spills in the Gulf of Mexico. We have a coastal protection group, and we're even caretakers of the Alamo now. So there's a lot going on here. My department, we run IT for all those different business units. It's everything from the day-to-day, keep the lights on, make sure the Skype works, all the way to modern initiatives, innovation like artificial intelligence, putting in chat bots, doing advanced analytics, things like that.
So obviously keeping the lights on takes up a lot of your time. I mean, you got to keep things running, but so finding time for innovation is probably a challenge. Maybe you can walk through the kind of the use case and maybe briefly this proof of concept that the GLO worked on for this past year.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that really keeps me energized about being in government is working for Commissioner George P. Bush. He is a fiscal conservative, and he holds us accountable. At the same time, he really pushes us to innovate as well. And so we've got to find a way to do both. And so that's kind of how we came to the proof of concept of wanting to go out and try something with AI just to see where it fit in our organization. We really weren't sure where to start at first. And so we did some research internally and called in our business partners, and everybody from KPMG. We leaned on Microsoft. We reached out to Amazon and some other partners to just kind of learn about what was the possible. Ultimately, KPMG came in and partnered with us and really knocked it out of the park as far as bringing in a huge team of people to sit down with us and help us identify what the potential use cases would be. We literally kind of had a list of things that we could choose from, and we ultimately selected something that we thought would be revenue positive, that would help us increase the revenue growth for the Permanent School Fund.
So obviously, I mean, think about the opportunities there to increase revenue for schools. As you identified the POC and you determined that may be the best use of your innovation time and resources, maybe walk through the timeline once you determined, hey, this is where we're going to go, this is the POC we're going to execute against, and kind of walk through the actual execution of that POC.
Absolutely. Everybody was excited at first, and I think we did a really good job of explaining to the business unit that we partnered with that this is a proof of concept, and that means it might work and it might not, because you never know, and that's why you do those things. That's why you take those chances. Everybody got on board. KPMG brought the team in, and we partnered them directly with the business unit and with some members from my IT team, and basically started bringing the combined team up to speed and kind of level setting. So you start with, hey, here's 4 or 5 years worth of data. The process that we were going to automate, so for us, we picked an oil and gas related process because that's where we generate the majority of our revenue. Unfortunately, we're kind of in a position where we rely on the oil and gas operator to give us the key data points that determine what they owe us. We do have one additional data point that we can use to kind of verify that what they're telling us is the truth, but we really do rely heavily on the data that they send us. And so we have a pretty heavy reconciliation process that we built some algorithms for that help us. We wanted to find a way if we could make that reconciliation process better. So in comes KPMG, and we started by teaching the team the process that we'd been using, showing them our tools, and giving them 5 years worth of data and kind of letting them go away and synthesize that and determine what the best approach would be as far as bringing the technology to bear. It ended up being very positive. Take that back, it wasn't at first, it was tough, right? Because it was complex, and even when you bring in experts in that space, getting level set when you've got a time box project because it's a proof of concept and you've got a hard 12 weeks to deliver a product in, getting everybody on the same page takes a little bit more time sometimes than you would think. And so it was slow going at first. Once the team really got on the same page, things started to move quickly. And we really moved along through the process of building out our proof of concept.
So any oil and gas folks in the room? Any energy folks? All right, that's good. So really what you're trying to do is hold them accountable, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely trying to make sure that we can maximize the revenue that we have available for the permanent school fund. And they're business partners, right? I mean, we rely on them to go out and produce land. We don't drill oil as part of the state. And so they're business partners. At the same time, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the state of Texas to make sure that we're doing the right thing. And so that's kind of the balance that we try to strike. And so part of this process was us taking the data. You know, one of the challenges we face is we have a limited number of staff, but we have thousands and thousands of oil leases. And so our staff members literally don't have the time to check every single lease. They have to prioritize, and we use an algorithm now that allows them to run a scan of all of the active leases and determine the leases that they think are most likely to need some attention.
So you mentioned not having the people to be able to accomplish essentially what is a backlog of work. Great use case for AI and automation. Maybe a rough order of magnitude. What percentage of I'll call it the population of data of oil and gas permits were you actually able to review in your kind of current state before the POC?
That's a good question. So over a rolling period, over a year, we probably were able to review 40-50% of the leases at the most. And in fact, I kind of brought some numbers here to cheat on. But what we found was for everything that our algorithm identified, we were finding some additional revenue on approximately 52% of the ones that we looked at. And that's good. That's not a bad hit rate based on that algorithm. But what we really thought was the opportunity for artificial intelligence and analytics to help us was if we're hitting on 52%, that means we're missing on 48%. That means 48% of our time we're looking at leases and revenue opportunities that don't pan out. And so while 52% is good, we thought we might be able to do better. And that's really what led us down this course as a proof of concept. The team that came in and started building out our proof of concept, like I said, it was analytics and artificial intelligence, really wanted to build out what they called the magic formula. And so that magic formula was going to walk through all of our oil and gas leases that were active and identify a prioritized score. And that prioritized score kind of was based on the amount of potential revenue that was there, but not only that, how easy it might be to go after it. Some reconciliations are pretty straightforward and the money's pretty easy to get. And in other cases, it's very difficult to get. And so this prioritization score was going to play a key part in helping us figure out which leases to go after. Ultimately, our proof of concept looked to be very successful in that we handed the team a data set that we knew going into it had 43 good leases or 43 hits. Once we ran the data through the proof of concept, our proof of concept solution identified correctly 41 of those 43. And so that was huge, right? That means that right off the bat, during that proof of concept, the artificial intelligence and analytics engine identified almost the exact same leases that our established algorithm had been identifying. We felt great about it.
So magic formula, we're using magic in our AI. So that wasn't on any of your slides today. So that's an interesting perspective. You mentioned the idea of team and maybe a little bit of a different question. We all think about the technology and the infrastructure that's needed to facilitate an AI solution. Maybe you can kind of delve into the team that's in that room, working on the POC and really the partnership that you had with I'll call it the process owners or the process experts and the folks helping to configure the POC.
Absolutely. We had some KPMG brought a great team to the table. There were oil and gas resources, and there were resources that were more technical and focused on the analytics side as well, and focused on artificial intelligence and building that solution out. And they were working directly with basically the business. And I have to tell you that this particular business team had an incredibly high level of requirement of quality. And the team was able to deliver in time, but it did take a while. It took a few iterations as far as going through. They used an agile methodology, and so every 2 to 3 weeks, they're delivering some kind of functional deliverable for people to look at. And I think that was a huge positive because that allowed everyone to see that there's real progress being made. I think those were big things. All the while, we had team members from our technical team there, to facilitate access to data, and at the same time, so that we could learn the proof of concept, so that we could continue to evolve it after the project was over, because we knew we might have to take that to production on our own, and ultimately, that was what happened.
And I think it helps when you have the commissioner really trying to drive innovation in the organization, that everyone realizes, hey, this is really going to glean some benefits and hopefully meet the commissioner's goals of innovation. And obviously the commissioner got reelected, so that was a good sign for George P. Bush. You mentioned some of the metrics around the initial POC. Maybe go through some of the outcomes and other benefits that were identified or as a result of this POC.
Kind of where we stand now is we are in the process of trying to get to production. We're not quite there yet. And I'm kind of skipping ahead to one of our future questions in order to answer this one. But, one of the challenges that I think that we faced was data quality. Our data was in pretty good shape, to be honest. I thought that probably 85% of our data was really good. And given that we are required to accept that data from external sources that we don't control, we knew it was going to be nearly impossible to get to perfectly clean data. At the same time, that 15% that wasn't good was really throwing us for a loop and really putting us in a bad position as far as getting that POC to work right. And the software worked, but what you had a lack of confidence from the business customer who didn't want to accept the product as being complete until it reached a certain threshold. And so that's really kind of delayed our ability to go from proof of concept into production, is trying to find a way to go identify every single one of those outcomes and resolve them. Because when what we're talking about is, our business unit who's got that 52% hit rate, we want to increase that with this tool to where 100% of their time, or close to 100% of their time, is looking at leases that are going to generate revenue. That's huge for them. And I think what we didn't see going into it is it really sets this expectation on their part of what they will accomplish and what kind of revenue they will generate when this goes live. And so they started to, pushback's not the right word, but there was definitely some stress on their part as far as going forward and making sure that they could uphold the promise of this project as well. And what that manifested itself in was producing requirements along the way that we didn't identify up front in order to make sure that they had a tool that they were incredibly confident in. Now we're really moving down the road and we're making good progress. Our project is scheduled to go into production this fall, should be in September, October, and I'm incredibly hopeful about what it's going to bring. I think there are potential opportunities to increase revenue by a significant amount.
So you mentioned the idea of agile. I think that's an important concept as, again, we look at the partnership of human and machine, if you will. Would you say that initial reticence of the, I guess, the user community was quickly overcome because of that, or was it because of the fact that they started to see results? Maybe you can kind of go through that evolution of how your workforce was essentially looking at this as, instead of a science project, this could actually make some impacts.
I think Agile really started, anytime your team, you've heard the whole storming, forming, and norming, right? And when you've got a 12-week time period to build a proof of concept, you've got to move quickly. The Agile process really helped build trust between the business unit and the technology team, because once the business unit saw that the technology team could regularly deliver, all of a sudden everybody had skin in the game, and the confidence and trust in the team just grew and grew. And those things were huge positives. And Karen, during that 12-week cycle, we really saw the team have more and more trust and more productivity. Somewhere probably around week 10 out of 12, I think a light bulb came on for the business, and I think they said, oh wow, this thing might actually work, and this thing really might be a game changer for us. And that's when things were still positive, but really got cautious about wanting to get it right. The last thing that we want to do, we've got these business partners that we work with, and the last thing that we want to do is turn on this new process and have it have an adverse effect for them. We want to uphold our fiduciary responsibility, but still be good partners. And so I think trying to be sure that we walk the line and that we get it right is what evolved really there at the end. It's what's carrying us through now.
So really enabling your workforce to be more efficient, more effective, and allow them to focus on, like you said, the right leases that are going to gain the most revenue to essentially fund those schools.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you've kind of talked about the identification of the proof of concept, the workforce working closely with the support team to develop the POC, the execution of that POC. You mentioned some of the lessons learned already around data. Maybe you can get a little bit more detail around, we've heard data a number of times, but some of those challenges that were faced and how they were overcome, but maybe some of the other lessons learned from the POC.
Well, I think the number one lesson learned for me was the confidence to take chances. You have to take chances, right? If you just keep doing the same things the same way, nothing's going to change. And we really had to step out there on a limb. When we started our project, there were not a lot of government agencies in Texas taking on something like this. We were one of the first to get started. And so there's some pressure behind it, right? And being a proof of concept and being one of the first, you almost kind of expect that it may not work, but yet you jump into it anyway. And for us, I'm really glad that we had the courage. I'm really glad that we had the executive support. And that's really empowered us to continue to have that mindset going forward. So I think that was definitely one lesson learned. I think another lesson learned is when it comes to these initiatives, when it comes to analytics, when it comes to AI, when it comes to machine learning and robotic process operations and all of those different kinds of things, data quality really is paramount. And you've got to take that into consideration, and you've got to plan for that, and you've got to figure out how you're going to answer those questions. What you think is good enough may not be good enough. And I think the last thing probably that I haven't mentioned yet was, even when you've got strong support from the top, getting together with the entire team and all of the stakeholders and creating that group mindset and agreement for what is the definition of done, I think that's something that's really critical to projects, because it's something that I found surprising, going on. I think when the proof of concept was so successful, it was surprising to see the technical team was incredibly energized by that and thought, this is amazing, this is fantastic. And the business team was too, but they also took a cautious stance that we didn't see coming. And it makes complete sense. I absolutely support their perspective on how they see it that way. It made me wish that we had had a deeper conversation earlier on about, what if this actually works? What are we going to do and how are we going to approach it? So I think we'll be more poised to be successful with that next time.
So really blazing that trail. I mean, you had to deal with the initial skepticism of, will this work? Now that we've proved that something works, the next phase will be hopefully approached with more vigor and more acceptance that, hey, these things are working for us. They're creating more productivity, more efficiency for what we're trying to do for the General Land Office and for the schools in Texas. So obviously you mentioned some of the technologies, AI, automation, machine learning. As you look to the success of this proof of concept and ultimately getting it into production, what does the future look like for the General Land Office as far as the embracing of those technologies, and even more generally the state of Texas and broader government? And I'd say in this case, everyone says that, well, government's lagging behind the private sector. I tend to argue, being a government guy in the room, that there's some innovation that the government can give to the private sector. So maybe give me some perspectives on in the audience. What's the next 5 years look like for GLO with these emerging technologies?
There's a lot of opportunities out there right now, and everybody talks about how fast things are moving. I think for us, luckily, we continue to have a strong proponent of innovation in our commissioner, George Bush, and in our chief clerk, Mark Havens, who push us to be fiscally conservative and at the same time to be innovative. And that's really hard to do, but it challenges us and makes us want to step out there. And so we're trying to find what's the right time with the technologies. We want to be early, but we don't want to be too early. Because there are costs related to that, and so you want to be successful. And so looking at artificial intelligence in the next year, we're looking at evolving our analytics practice to get to a place where we can use prescriptive analytics. We're looking to take this proof of concept solution and build in stronger machine learning. We're looking at some things that private sector's already done a lot of, but government's done less of, and that we're moving towards a chat bot in the next few months. Mm-hmm. And also trying to look for good opportunities for robotic process automation, and even for rapid application development. I think there are some opportunities there. So I think for us, it's what's the right time where it's a good bet that you have a better shot at innovation because you're not too early, but at the same time, not jumping out there too late to where you're behind, because we want to be out there.
Well, and think about the use cases that other states could embrace with the use of how you've blazed the trail. I mean, there's other energy producing states, but you mentioned some of the other uses of land that could be beneficial to this POC and ultimately the production. We've got about 2 minutes remaining. Would like to ask the audience, and I understand that lunch is outside, so you may be reticent to ask any questions, but definitely open it up to the audience in the remaining 2 minutes for questions for Cory.
Did you get Skype to work?
Ultimately, no. Not in time. It was too late. The question was, did we get Skype to work? And the answer is not quite in time, but hey.
So we can do machine learning and AI, but we just can't get Skype to work.
That's right. That's the way the day goes sometimes, right?
Well, if there are no questions, Cory, I'd want to thank you for bringing the government perspective to the audience and to the forum today, and appreciate the time and look forward to continuing the work with GLO.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.